Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. The nightmare of the 41st millennium is about to face a weapon it has never encountered before: competent logistics. We follow a general from Earth's past, a man of iron, mud, and whiskey, as he wakes up in a universe where hope has died. Armed with nothing but a cigar and a tactical genius that transcends time, can a mortal man organize a crusade against the dark gods? The story begins right now. Before we begin, please like and subscribe to the channel to support our journey into the dark. The sky above the shattered remnants of the Cadian flotilla cracked open, revealing a bleeding wound in reality. It was not the familiar nauseating purple of a warp rift, but a tear of pure blinding white light, a singularity ripping through the eternal night of the void. From this jagged scar, a figure fell. He did not descend with the grace of an angel of death, nor the corrupted power of a demon prince. He fell like a stone, a meteoric impact of flesh and fabric, crashing through the adamantium hull of the command ship, the Emperor's Retribution. The impact shook the Gothic vessel to its very keel. Stained glass shattered in the cathedral-like bridge, raining shards of colored saintly imagery down upon the panicked crew. Alarm klaxons screamed a harsh, mechanical wail that mixed with the terrifying roar of the warp storm outside. Smoke billowed from the crater in the center of the command deck, obscuring the intruder. Imperial Navy officers and Cadian survivors froze, their last pistols raised, trembling hands clutching rosaries. They expected a boarding torpedo, a tyrannid biopod, or a servant of the ruinous powers. Instead, the figure that emerged from the settling dust was utterly alien in his mundane appearance. He wore a heavy dark blue coat made of wool, stained with the mud of a world long dead. He smelled of wet earth, stale tobacco, and cheap whiskey, a sharp organic scent that clashed violently with the recycled air, ozone, and sacred engine oil of the starship. Humanity called for a demigod to save them in their darkest hour. Instead, the warp spat out a man who smelled of wet wool and cheap tobacco. Ulysses S. Grant coughed, waving away the acrid smoke with a leather-gloved hand. He looked down at his boots, expecting the bloody soil of Cold Harbor or the trenches of Petersburg. Instead, he stood on cold, vibrating metal, surrounded by men and women in uniforms that looked more like priestly vestments than soldiers' kit. He felt the headache first, a thumping, rhythmic pounding behind his eyes that synced with the thrum of the ship's massive plasma reactor. He looked up, his eyes weary set, deep in a bearded face carved from granite. To his left lay the body of the ship's former commander, a man adorned in gold braid and bionic implants, now reduced to a headless corpse by the debris of Grant's arrival. "Where is my horse?" Grant muttered, his voice a gravelly rasp that seemed too quiet for the cavernous room. Yet it carried a weight of authority that silenced the sobbing servitors. He patted his pockets, finding his cigar case intact. He pulled one out, bit off the end, and spat it onto the pristine metal deck. "Halt, in the name of the Holy Inquisition!" a voice shrilled. A woman stepped forward, wearing a long coat and a peaked cap, a bolt pistol aimed squarely at Grant's chest. It was Commissar Elira. Her face was a mask of fanatical terror and discipline. "Identify yourself, warp spawn, or be purged." Grant stared at the weapon. It was huge, impractical, essentially a handheld cannon. He looked at the woman, then past her, to the massive holographic tactical display, the cogitator bank dominating the center of the room. It showed the flotilla, a scattered broken line of green dots being devoured by a swarm of red icons. The geometry of defeat. He recognized it instantly. It wasn't space warfare to him. It was a flanking maneuver. It was a rout. "I asked you a question." Elira screamed, her finger tightening on the trigger. Grant ignored the gun. He stepped over the dead commander, his boots clacking heavily on the deck. He walked straight to the tactical map, his eyes narrowing as he studied the flow of the battle. "Your right flank is collapsing," he said, striking a match against the side of the golden console. The flame flared, illuminating his tired eyes. "And your center is overextended. Who is in command here?" The sheer audacity of the question stunned the bridge crew. A tech priest, his red robes trailing cables, clicked in binary confusion. "The Lord Admiral is deceased. The probability of survival is negligible. We are fleeing." "Fleeing," Grant repeated, tasting the word like sour milk. He took a long drag of the cigar, the smoke drifting up to mingle with the incense of the ship's sensors. He looked at the main view screen. Outside, the void was alive with fire. Grotesque ships, spiked and twisted, were hunting the Imperial vessels like wolves chasing sheep. "They are demons, sir," a young ensign whispered, shaking. "The Neverborn. We cannot fight them. We can only run." Grant turned to look at the boy. The general's face was unreadable, a mask of stoic pragmatism that had seen the worst of humanity, and simply catalogued it for later review. "I don't care if they are demons," he grunted, the smoke trailing from his lips. "Do they bleed?" The ensign blinked. "Sir, do they bleed?" Grant's voice rose, cracking like a whip. Yes, when the holy bolters strike true, they bleed ichor, and then we can kill them." Grant interrupted, turning back to the map. He pointed a gloved finger at the center of the red swarm. "Stop the retreat. Turn this ship around." "Are you mad?" Elira lowered her weapon slightly, confusion warring with duty. "To turn is suicide. We are outnumbered. We are outgunned. The Emperor protects, but he demands we survive to fight another day. There is no other day if you die with your backs to the enemy." Grant said, his tone devoid of the religious zeal they were used to. It was cold, hard fact. "Look at them. They are chasing you. They are drunk on victory. They have lost their formation. They are a mob, not an army." He traced a shape on the hololith, a U-shape. "Signal the heavy cruisers. Tell them to cut engines and drift. Let the enemy pass them. Then we strike the flanks. We close the door. That is..." The void ambush of St. Drusus the tech priest clicked, analyzing the logic. "But the Codex Astartes does not recommend." "I don't know your saint, and I don't know your Codex," Grant growled, slamming his hand down on the metal console, making the hologram flicker. "I know that if we run, they will pick us off one by one. If we turn and fight, we might die, but we will make them pay a butcher's bill so high, they will hesitate to follow the survivors." He looked at Elira. "You have a gun, madam. Use it on the enemy or use it on me. But if you use it on me, this fleet dies in 10 minutes. Your choice." The bridge fell, doored into a suffocating silence. The only sound was the distant thud of macro cannons and the hum of the ventilation trying to cycle out the cigar smoke. Elira looked at the strange, disheveled man. He possessed no aura of sanctity, no halo of power. He looked like a laborer, tired and worn. But in his eyes, she saw a terrifying clarity. He was not afraid of the monsters outside. He was calculating their inventory. Slowly, Elira holstered her bolt pistol. She turned to the comms officer. "Do as he says. Signal the fleet. Execute the ambush pattern." Grant didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply leaned over the map, watching the red dots swarm closer, his mind already converting the horrors of the warp into numbers, distance, and supply consumption. "Hard to starboard," Grant ordered, ash falling from his cigar onto the ancient sacred controls. "Let's see how these bastards like a distinct lack of hospitality." The Emperor's retribution groaned as its massive thrusters fired, arresting its flight. The ship began to turn not away from the darkness, but directly into it. Chapter 2. Hold the line. The asteroid was not a fortress. It was a tombstone floating in the void, a jagged chunk of rock roughly the size of a small city caught in the gravitational eddy of a gas giant. The survivors of the Cadian 812th had scrambled onto its surface, their ships grounded or hovering in low orbit, venting plasma like bleeding whales. To the soldiers, this was the end, a desperate last stand before the inevitable slaughter. To Ulysses S. Grant, it was merely high ground. Grant stood on a ridge of gray silicate, looking down at the defensive perimeter. The wind here was artificial, generated by the localized atmospheric shield generators carrying the taste of recycled air and copper. He chewed on the stub of his cigar unlit, for he was saving his last matches, and watched a team of tech priests fuss over a squadron of Lehman Russ battle tanks. The machines were crippled, their tracks shattered by enemy fire in the previous engagement. "They are useless, Lord," the lead engine seer whined, his mechadendrites twitching in agitation. "The machine spirits are wounded. They cannot advance. We must perform the rite of abandonment and salvage the blessed bolters." Grant looked at the tanks. Then he looked at the narrow choke point leading to their position, a canyon of razor-sharp rock. Abandonment. Grant repeated the word, rolling off his tongue like gravel. "We don't abandon artillery just because the wheels are broken. Dig them in." The engine seer recoiled as if Grant had suggested dancing naked with a demon. "Dig them in. Bury the hulls," Grant ordered, pointing to the rocky soil. "Cover the tracks. Leave only the turrets exposed. If they can't move, they are no longer tanks. They are pillboxes. They are fixed gun emplacements. And right now, a fixed gun that doesn't miss is worth 10 that can drive but can't shoot." The logic was brutal, industrial, and completely devoid of the mysticism the Mechanicus craved. But the Cadian tank crews, muddy and exhausted, understood it immediately. It was the logic of survival. Within the hour, the useless tanks were submerged in the rock, their battle cannons leveled at the canyon entrance, forming a kill zone of terrifying concentration. Grant walked the line, his heavy coat flapping in the thin wind. He didn't offer prayers. He didn't recite the Lectitio Divinitatis. He checked ammo crates. He pointed to a heavy weapons team setting up a bolter. "Move that tripod 10 yards left. You're blocking the field of fire for the squad behind you. You want to kill the enemy, not your friends." Further down the line, a commotion broke out. A group of guardsmen, young and white-faced with terror, were being lined up against a rock wall. Commissar Illyra paced before them, her bolt pistol drawn, the barrel still smoking from a summary execution she had performed minutes earlier. "Cowards!" Illyra screamed, her voice cracking with fanatical fury. "You abandoned your posts. You turned your backs on the Emperor's enemies. The penalty is death. I will cleanse your souls with." "Belay that order," Grant's voice cut through the screaming like a knife. He didn't shout, but the tone was absolute. Illyra spun around, eyes wide with manic fervor. "Do not interfere, General. These men fled the outer perimeter. Cowardice spreads like rot. It must be cauterized." Grant walked past her, placing himself between the executioner and the condemned. He looked at the soldiers. They weren't mutants or traitors. They were boys shaking, covered in grime, their eyes wide with the trauma of seeing hell unleashed. "Did you drop your rifles?" Grant asked them. One of the soldiers, a girl no older than 18 with Mariah stenciled on her flak armor, shook her head violently. "No. No, sir. We brought them." Grant nodded. He turned to Illyra. "They have their weapons. They have their hands. Killing them wastes resources." "They have no honor," Illyra hissed. "I don't need honor right now," Madam Commissar, Grant said, stepping closer to her, invading her personal space with the smell of old tobacco and unwashed wool. "I need logistics. I need mules." He gestured to the pile of heavy ammo crates near the landing zone, shells for the buried tanks, heavy power packs for the last cannons. The tanks are thirsty. These men are too scared to shoot straight, but they are strong enough to carry boxes. He turned back to the terrified squad. You are now the quartermaster's corps. Your job is to run ammunition from the dropships to the front line. If a gun stops firing because it's empty, I will personally shoot you myself. If you run away, the demons will eat you. So pick up a box. Mariah stared at him. She had expected a bullet. She had expected a sermon about her worthless soul. Instead, she was given a job. A simple physical task. Carry the box. Don't let the gun stop. The panic in her chest didn't vanish, but it solidified into purpose. She grabbed a crate of heavy bolter rounds, the weight grounding her to reality. The attack came 20 minutes later. It did not begin with strategy, but with a howl. The Chaos Warband, a horde of cultists led by twisted Astartes, surged into the canyon. They expected a routed enemy, a disorganized mob praying for death. They charged screaming, seeking glory in melee combat. What they found was a meat grinder. Fire Grant said softly into the vox bead he had awkwardly learned to use. The buried Lehman Rust tanks roared in unison. The sound was not the glorious thunder of a crusade. It was the rhythmic, mechanical thumping of a factory stamping metal. The canyon floor erupted. Because the tanks were hull down and the enemy returned fire pinged harmlessly off the rocks protecting them. The Chaos Marines, huge and terrifying, found themselves walking into a wall of high explosive ordnance that had been pre-sighted to the millimeter. On the ridge, the infantry opened up. The crack, crack, crack of laser guns was dry and sharp, a disciplined volley fire that Grant had drilled into them in the short hour before the assault. Aim low. Grant walked behind the line hands, clasped behind his back. Don't shoot the armor. Shoot the legs. Break their momentum. Mariah ran. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she ran. She dropped a crate of power packs next to a screaming heavy weapons team, their barrel glowing red hot. Loading, the gunner shouted, slamming a fresh pack in. The laser fire resumed instantly, cutting down a leaping creature that looked like a skinned dog. The gunner looked back at her. Good work, kid. Go get more. She wasn't a coward. She was a gear in the machine. And the machine was working. For the first time since the fall of Cadia, Mariah felt something other than despair. She felt the cold, hard satisfaction of competence. She looked up at the ridge where the strange general stood. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't screaming battle cries. He was checking his pocket watch. The enemy charge broke. The cultists, realizing that their blood sacrifice was simply becoming a pile of corpses with no gain, turned and fled. Even the Chaos Space Marines, seeing the futility of charging a fortified kill box, fell back, dragging their wounded. The cheering from the Cadian lines was hesitant at first, then raucous. They hadn't just survived. They had won. And they had done it efficiently. High above the asteroid, cloaked in the darkest shadows of the void, a sleek, black vessel observed the battle. Inquisitor Varro stood in the observation blister of the Silent Judgment. His hand hovered over a rune-encrusted console. Under his palm lay the activation key for a cyclonic torpedo. One press and the asteroid below, along with Grant the Cadians and the taint of chaos, would be reduced to molten slag. It was the safe choice, the Codex choice. Lord Inquisitor, his acolyte whispered. The energy spike from the warp rift. That man. He is an anomaly. We should purge the variable. Varro watched the tactical display. He saw the U-shape ambush. He saw the buried tanks. He saw a retreat turned into a fortress. He had seen generals inspire men with faith. He had seen Astartes inspire men with fear. But he had never seen a man inspire an army with inventory management. No, Varro whispered, pulling his hand back from the button. The ghost of a smile touched his scarred lips. Put the weapon on standby. I want to see what this creature does next. He fights like a man who intends to win, not just die well. Varro turned away from the window. Prepare a shuttle. I wish to inspect this General Grant with my own eyes. Chapter 3. The Mechanicus Audit. The silence of the asteroid was broken only by the rhythmic hissing of hydraulic pistons and the murmuring of the wounded. The battle was over, but for Ulysses S. Grant, the real work had just begun. He sat on an empty Prometheum crate, a sheaf of parchment, actual tangible paper he had demanded from a bewildered scribe spread out on his knees. He was counting. Not the dead, but the living. And more importantly, what the living needed to eat and shoot. A shadow fell over him, cold and angular. Query a voice buzzed, sounding like two stones grinding together inside a tin can. The organic designated Grant. Your existence violates 7 distinct laws of the physics of the materium. Explain. Grant didn't look up immediately. He finished tallying the remaining last packs, licked the tip of his pencil, and wrote the number down. Only then did he raise his eyes. Looming over him was a nightmare of red velvet and brass. Magos Tiber of the Adeptus Mechanicus was more machine than man. A cluster of optical lenses whirred where his face should have been, and a forest of mechadendrites, snake-like mechanical arms, writhed behind his back, each tipping with a scanner, a drill, or a sensor. I am General Grant, he said, his voice flat. And you are blocking my light. The Magos did not move. His optical sensors cycled through the spectrum's thermal radiation warp resonance. Scan negative. No taint of the archenemy. No mark of the Astartes gene seed. You are baseline human. Yet your tactical efficiency rating in the previous engagement exceeds the capacity of unaugmented gray matter by 400%. One of Tiber's metal tendrils slithered forward, hovering inches from Grant's face, a green laser scanning his retina. Are you a construct? An archaeotech fragment given flesh? Or a manifestation of the Omnissiah's will? Grant swatted the metal tentacle away, as if it were a persistent fly. The clang of his leather glove against the sacred metal echoed in the quiet air. I am a man who needs a manifest, Grant snapped. I have 3,000 soldiers. They have eaten nothing but terror for 2 days. I need to know how much nutrient paste we have, how many gallons of water, and why your machine spirits keep jamming the damn radios. Tiber paused. The concept of a commander caring about inventory counts immediately after a miraculous victory was highly logical. It tickled the cogitators in his brain. Usually Imperial officers demanded medals, executions, or statues. The logistical data is available in the new sphere. Tiber said a note of superiority in his synthesized voice. It is transmitted directly to the cortex. I don't have a cortex implant. Grant grumbled, tapping his temple. I have a brain. And I like paper. Now, Magos, look at this. Grant pointed to the map of the sector he had sketched. It was crude, drawn with charcoal, but the geometry was precise. Your ships, Grant said, tracing a line. They move individually. They jump, they fight, they wait for resupply. It's inefficient. It's a mess. If we are to move forward, we cannot just be a wandering mob. We need a railroad. Road. Tiber processed the archaic term. A linear transportation infrastructure restricted to terrestrial surfaces, irrelevant in the void. It's a metaphor, Grant said, standing up. He was a head shorter than the cyborg, but his presence was denser. We need a continuous line of supply. We don't just jump ships to the battle. We create a corridor. We secure the space behind us. We set up depots on these moons. We chain the ships together in convoys protected by the heavy cruisers on the flanks, not the front. The supplies move with the army, not behind it. Tiber's mechadendrites stopped writhing. His internal processors were running simulations at the speed of light. He modeled Grant's Void Railroad. He calculated fuel consumption. He calculated defensibility. Click, whir, chime. The logic was flawless. It was a strategy of industrial attrition, applying the principles of mass transit to void warfare. It was beautiful. Efficiency projection increase of 34%. Tiber beeped his voice, trembling with what might have been religious ecstasy. Resource waste minimization optimal. You speak the language of the machine god, yet you wear the flesh of the weak. I speak the language of winning wars, Grant said, turning back to his crate. Glory is for the poets, Magos. I am here for the inventory. Now get me those numbers and fix the radios. I can't command if I can't talk. Tiber bowed a stiff mechanical motion of respect he rarely offered to anyone without a cog-shaped axe. It shall be done, Lord Logistician. As the Magos retreated clanking away to scream binary orders at his underlings, Commissar Illyra approached. She looked at Grant with a mix of suspicion and grudging awe. She had seen him verbally dismantle a high-ranking tech priest, something that usually resulted in being turned into a servitor. You have tamed the cogboy, Illyra noted, watching Tiber leave. He usually threatens to weld our mouths shut if we ask for a manifest. He respects logic, Grant said, lighting a match on his boot to ignite the stump of his cigar. Most men do if you strip away the superstition. He walked over to the large holographic map of the sector that was flickering near the communication array. The system was wide dark and infested with enemies. But Grant's eyes didn't look at the enemy fleets. He looked at the infrastructure. He pointed a gloved finger at a spinning smog-covered globe in the distance. It was a hive world currently designated as Lost by Imperial Command. We aren't running anymore, Grant said, the smoke curling around his face. Sir Illyra asked. That world is overrun. It is a death trap. That world, Grant corrected, is a manufacturing hub. It has 3 munitions factories and a spaceport capable of refitting a cruiser. His eyes were hard, devoid of fear, filled only with the cold calculation of a man who needed tools. We are going to take that warehouse. Chapter 4. The Fortress of Ash. The hive world of Orestes Prime did not look like a planet. It looked like a diseased lung made of iron. From the viewing deck of the Emperor's Retribution, Ulysses S. Grant stared down at the gray sphere. The surface was a continuous sprawl of Gothic factories and habitation spires shrouded in a perpetual storm of toxic smog and volcanic ash. It was a fortress of a billion souls now silent, save for the screams echoing on the Vox channels. Target lock established, the gunnery master announced, his voice vibrating with the thrill of impending violence. Lance batteries are charged. Macro cannons ready. We can level the primary spire in 3 volleys. The Emperor's justice will be swift. Belay that order, Grant said, not turning from the window. The bridge froze. Inquisitor Varro stepped forward, his leather boots creaking. General, the city is lost. The arch-enemy holds the high ground. The standard protocol is orbital sanitization. We burn the infection, then we sift through the ashes. If you burn the infection, you burn the factories, Grant said, tapping the glass. And I need those factories. I need the ammo lines. I need the Promethium refineries. If we blow them up, we might as well shoot ourselves in the head and save the enemy the trouble. So what do you propose? Illyra asked, her hand resting on her sword hilt. We cannot assault the walls. They have void shields. They have heavy bolter emplacements. A direct assault would cost 10,000 lives in the first hour. I have no intention of assaulting the walls, Grant muttered. He turned to the bewildered staff. "Get me the engineering schematics of the city. Not the military maps, the civilian blueprints. I want to see the water tables, the power grids, the sewage lines." He walked to the hololith, which now displayed the towering hive spire, a metal mountain piercing the clouds. "They are up there safe behind their shields," Grant said, tracing the perimeter. "But they need to drink, they need to eat, and they need to breathe." He looked at his officers. "We aren't going to charge them. We are going to starve them. We are going to choke them. Deploy the men to the perimeter. Issue shovels, not bayonets. We are digging in." Down on the surface, the air tasted of sulfur and dead dreams. The ash fell like gray snow, coating the armor of the Cadian guardsmen, who were now performing the most unglamorous duty in the galaxy, digging trenches. It was a scene from a forgotten era. Super heavy tanks were used as bulldozers, pushing mountains of industrial slag to form ramparts. Grant walked the lines, ignoring the sniper fire that occasionally cracked from the high spires. He wore a rebreather mask over his mouth, his cigar unlit in his hand. Deeper, he told a sergeant whose squad was excavating a trench line. "If you can see the sky can see you. I want overhead cover. I want drainage ditches. A soldier with trench foot is a soldier who can't march." The men grumbled, but they dug. They were used to charging into machine gun fire, dying for glory. This manual labor, this methodical strangulation of the enemy, was alien to them. But for the first time in months, they weren't dying in droves. They were building a vice. Grant stopped at a junction where tech priests were welding a massive pipe shut. "Is that the main aqueduct?" "Affirmative," the tech priest chirped. "It supplies the upper spires with recycled coolant and water." "Cut it," Grant ordered. "Divert the flow into the waste processing sumps. Let them drink mud." High above in the Spire of Saints, now desecrated with 8 pointed stars and flayed skins, chaos. Lord Vorin watched the activity below with amusement. He was a giant of a transhuman, clad in power armor, the color of dried blood, horned and terrifying. "Look at them," Vorin rumbled, his voice amplified by the vox grill of his helmet. "They do not attack. They play in the dirt like worms." He turned to the pulsating rift in the center of the room, a tear in reality where the warp bled through. "Malachar," he spoke to the shadows. "The General is a coward. He refuses to fight. He builds walls of mud against the chosen of the dark gods." A whisper came from the rift, a sound like silk sliding over a razor blade. "Do not mistake patience for weakness, Vorin. The weaver sees the threads tightening. He does not seek your head. He seeks your breath." Vorin laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Let him dig. When the blood frenzy takes us, we will storm their ditches and skull-fuck their corpses. They are merely preparing their own graves." Days turned into a week. The siege of Orestes Prime was not a battle of thunder and lightning, but a slow, agonizing suffocation. Grant sat in his command bunker, surrounded by reports. "Sector 4 power grid severed," he read aloud. "Sector 9 food synthesis contaminated." Elira stood by the entrance, watching him. She had expected him to break. The pressure from high command to attack was immense. Yet Grant sat there drinking synthesized coffee, calm as a statue. "They are screaming on the Vox channels," Elira said quietly. "The enemy. They are taunting us, calling us cowards." "Let them scream," Grant said, finally lighting his cigar. The flame illuminated the deep lines of exhaustion on his face. Screaming takes oxygen, and they are running out of that too. He stood up and walked to the periscope. Through the lenses, he saw the lights of the hive spire flickering and dying block by block. The great void shields were fluctuating, their generators starving for power. "They are getting desperate," Grant noted. A desperate enemy makes mistakes. Tell the artillery to prepare. When those shields drop, I don't want a single shell wasted on the walls. Aim for the command deck." He turned back to Elira. "In my time, we called this the anaconda. You wrap around them and you squeeze until the ribs crack. Tell the men to sharpen their bayonets. They're coming out soon." Chapter 5, The Grinder. The gates of the hive spire did not open so much as they burst outward, vomited forth by the pressure of the madness within. The silence of the siege was shattered by a sound that was not human, a cacophony of screeching metal, howling beasts, and the chanting of a million damned souls. From the command trench, Grant watched through his periscope. The ash storm parted to reveal the horror. A tide of cultists surged forward, a chaotic sea of rags and improvised weapons. But they were not alone. Mixed among them were nightmares made flesh, demons of corn, red-skinned and blood-slick, loping on digitigrade legs, their brass blades hungry for the kill. "They are charging." Captain Vance shouted into the Vox, panic edging into his voice. "Frontal assault across the entire line. Permission to open fire." "Wait," Grant said, his hand gripping the periscope tight enough to whiten the leather of his gloves. "Look closer." Magnified through the lens, that the atrocity became clear. The front ranks of the charging horde were not soldiers. They were civilians, men, women, and children of Orestes Prime, chained together, weeping, stumbling forward as human shields. Behind them, the Chaos Space Marines marched, using the wall of innocent flesh to absorb the Imperial last fire. They are using the population as armor. Elira whispered, her face pale. She gripped the edge of the sandbag wall. "If we fire, we slaughter the very people we came to save. If we don't, the World Eaters will be in the trenches in 2 minutes." She looked at Grant, expecting the agonizing indecision that paralyzed most commanders. Grant didn't hesitate. He didn't look at the faces of the weeping civilians. He looked at the geometry of the charge. "They are banking on our morality," he muttered, adjusting the focus. "Or our bloodlust. They expect us to freeze or to shoot blindly." He grabbed the Voxcaster handset. "All units, this is Grant. Do not fire on the center. I repeat, hold fire on the center." Sir Vance crackled back. "They are closing distance 80 meters. Sector 4 and 5. Grant barked, his voice overriding the static. "Pull back your heavy bolters. Open a gap in the line. Make it look like a rout. Let them see a hole in the fence." On the battlefield, the Imperial line seemingly buckled. 2 platoons of Cadians retreated from the center, leaving a gaping 100-meter-wide corridor leading straight into the killing fields behind the first trench line. The effect was instantaneous. The human instinct for survival overrode the chains of the oppressors. The civilians, seeing the open space, surged toward it, dragging their captors or breaking their formations. The human shield disintegrated as the terrified mob funneled into the gap, running away from the guns, not towards them. "Now," Grant said, dropping his cigar into the mud, "they have separated the wheat from the chaff." The civilians poured through the gap, effectively removing themselves from the line of fire. Left behind, exposed on the open ground, were the Chaos Marines and the demons, suddenly stripped of their meat shield. "Close the door," Grant ordered. From the flanks, the hidden heavy bolter teams decloaked. The Lehman Rust tanks, buried hull down in the rock, swiveled their turrets. The gap was not an escape route. It was a funnel, a kill box. Fire for effect. The order was spoken softly, but the result was apocalyptic. The air turned into solid noise. Thousands of lasguns, hundreds of heavy bolters, and the earth-shaking boom of battle cannons erupted simultaneously. It was not a battle. It was an industrial process. The crossfire was mathematically perfect, intersecting at waist height across the field. Lord Vorin, striding arrogantly behind his shield of flesh, suddenly found himself standing alone. The civilians had fled to the sides. The cultists were vaporized in a mist of red mist. He looked up, his helm's sensors screaming warnings of multiple target locks. "Cowards," Vorin roared, revving his chain axe. "Face me, face the chosen of Khorne." There was no duel. There was no glorious melee. There was only the physics of high-velocity mass impacting armor. A battle cannon shell from a buried tank struck Vorin squarely in the chest. The impact didn't just kill him, it erased him. His ceramite armor shattered, his transhuman physiology liquefied by the concussive force. The Lord of Ash became nothing more than a wet smear on the gray landscape. The demons, lacking a summoner and shredded by the sheer volume of firepower, lost their grip on reality. One by one, they popped out of existence, banished back to the warp by the cleansing purity of overwhelming kinetic force. Silence returned to the battlefield, heavier than before. The only sound was the weeping of the rescued civilians huddled behind the Imperial lines and the cooling crackle of las barrels. Grant walked out of the command bunker. He didn't cheer. He walked past the cheering guardsmen, past the smoking craters. He walked to a terrified Cadian trooper who was trembling, clutching a rosary. "Good discipline," Grant said to the boy, patting his shoulder. "You held the line." He turned to Elira, who was staring at the field of carnage with wide eyes. "The butcher's bill is paid," Grant said, lighting a fresh cigar. "The warehouse is open. Let's go verify the inventory." He walked toward the Hive City, not as a conqueror striding over the vanquished, but as a tired logistics officer finally gaining access to the supply depot he had been promised. Chapter 6. Blood and Railways. The void between the asteroid belt and Orestes Prime had been tamed, or so Ulysses S. Grant had intended. He had drawn a line through the chaotic swirls of the Empyrean, a void railroad. It was a convoy system of terrifying rigidity. Heavy haulers in the center, flanked by picket ships moving at a uniform speed, creating a continuous stream of munitions, food, and fuel to the front. It was the artery of the crusade. But arteries can be cut. "Contact," the Vox officer screamed, the audio spiking with static and the wet sounds of dying men. "Convoy 7 Alpha is under attack. Boarding torpedoes. Emperor preserve us. They are coming through the hull." Grant stood before the hololith, his hands clasped behind his back. On the display, the orderly green line of the convoy was fraying. Red icons, fast, erratic, and aggressive, were swarming the transport ships. They didn't engage the escorts. They ignored the warships. They went straight for the soft underbelly, the cargo. "They aren't trying to capture the ships," Grant murmured, watching a fuel tanker blossom into a silent fireball. "They are hunting." Skull champion Drogath did not care for strategy. He did not care for the weak, cowardly logic of supply lines and sieges. He was a creature of pure distilled violence, clad in brass and bone. He stood on the bridge of a captured Imperial transport, his chain axe revving with a hungry growl. Around him, the crew lay in pieces, wet, red decorations for his triumph. "The coward general hides behind his walls," Drogath roared, kicking a severed head across the deck. "He thinks his numbers will save him. He thinks his schedules will protect him." He looked out the viewport at the drifting wreckage of the convoy. He hadn't stolen the supplies. He had destroyed them. He wanted the Imperial army to starve. He wanted them desperate. He wanted them to come out and fight like men, not accountants. "Bleed them," Drogath commanded his warband. "Cut the veins, make the gray man weep for every bullet he cannot fire." Back on the Emperor's retribution, the reports piled up like snowdrifts. Convoy 9 lost. 4,000 tons of promethium destroyed. Convoy 12 boarded. Crew slaughtered. Cargo jettisoned. Convoy 14 engine failure. Stragglers hunted down. Grant sat at his desk, the dim light of a glow globe casting long shadows across his face. The air in the room was stale heavy with the smell of old paper and something else, something sharp and sweet. He picked up the slate. Another 1,000 men dead. Not in battle, not taking a hill, but sitting in the dark of space, waiting for supplies that would never arrive. It was the wilderness campaign all over again. The burning forests, the endless lists of names. His hand trembled, just a little. He reached into the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a bottle. It wasn't the fine amasec of the imperial nobility. It was a crude rot-gut spirit distilled from engine coolant and starch procured from a rat-faced crewman in the lower decks. He poured a glass. The amber liquid looked like oil in the dim light. "General," the door chime buzzed, followed immediately by Commissar Elira's voice. Grant froze. He looked at the glass and then at the door. For a second, he wasn't a Lord Militant. He was a failure in a dusty uniform hiding his weakness from the world. "Enter," Grant said, his voice raspy. He didn't hide the glass. He simply placed a heavy manifest on top of it. Elira stepped in. She looked exhausted. Her uniform was stained with soot, her eyes rimmed with red. "The men are wavering, sir. The stories of Drogath. They say he eats the hearts of the navigators. The crews are refusing to fly the convoy routes without Astartes escort. And we have no Astartes." She stopped. She sniffed the air. The scent of the cheap alcohol cut through the ozone. Her eyes flicked to Grant, then to the desk. She saw the tremor in his hand as he held his pen. "Is there a problem with the morale of the command staff, General?" She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Grant looked at her. He saw the judgment in her eyes, the rigid, uncompromising morality of the commissariat. She could shoot him for incompetence. She could shoot him for weakness. "The problem," Madam Commissar Grant said, standing up slowly, "is that mathematics is losing to terror. I can calculate the fuel needed to reach Orestes. I can calculate the tonnage of shells required to level a fortress. But I cannot calculate the variable of a madman who burns food just to watch people starve." He picked up the bottle, no point in hiding it now, and poured a splash into the cap, downing it in one burn. "The men are scared because they think they are prey. They think we are just feeding them into the grinder." "Are we not?" Elira asked softly. Grant slammed the bottle down. "No, we are baiting the trap. But the bait is getting eaten faster than the trap can snap shut." He walked to the viewport, staring into the infinite black. "He wants a fight, Elira. He wants me to lose my temper. He wants me to send the fleet out in a rage so he can pick us apart in the confusion." He turned back, his eyes hard, the haze of alcohol burning away under the heat of his resolve. "I'm going to give him what he wants, but not the way he thinks." Chapter 7. Blood and Railways 2. Convoy 19. Beta lumbered through the void like a herd of wounded whales. 12 massive transport ships, their engines sputtering, their void shields flickering with the telltale signs of energy failure. To any observer, it was a desperate final gamble to push supplies through to the starving front lines. To Skull Champion Drogath, it was an insult. It was a dinner bell. "Look at them." Drogath hissed, saliva dripping from his fanged maw onto the sensor display. "They do not even have escorts. The coward general has run out of ships. The Chaos Fleet, a jagged collection of raider vessels painted in the colors of dried gore, decloaked from the nebula. They didn't bother with formation. They surged forward, driven by the hunger of the dark gods. Why waste ammunition destroying them when they could board them and feast on the crews? "Boarding torpedoes," Drogath roared. "Leave no one alive. I want the general's head for the skull throne." Hundreds of assault pods fired from the Chaos ships, slamming into the hulls of the Imperial transports. The metal groaned and tore. The ramps dropped. The worshippers of corn charged into the cargo holds, expecting to find terrified scribes and crates of rations. The interior of transport ship Goliath was dark. The air was cold. Drogath kicked down the blast door to the main hold, his chain axe revving. "Come out, little worms. Come out and die." The lights flickered on, not the soft yellow of lumens, but the harsh red glare of combat klaxons. The hold was not empty, and it was not full of grain. Chained to the deck row upon row were Lehman Russ demolisher tanks. Their barrels were leveled directly at the boarding ramps. Behind them, hundreds of Cadian shock troopers lay in prone positions, laser guns steady. "Open fire!" The voice of Grant echoed over the ship's Vox system. It was bored. It was calm. The sound was deafening. In the confined space of the cargo hold, the demolisher cannons didn't just fire. They erased everything in front of them. The boarding torpedoes packed with Chaos Space Marines were turned into shrapnel and pink mist instantly. The cargo was not supplies. The cargo was death. Drogath survived the initial volley, his Terminator armor absorbing the shrapnel that shredded his lesser kin. Roaring with apoplectic fury, he charged through the smoke, hacking apart a tank turret with a single swing of his energized axe. "Grant," he bellowed, the sound shaking the bulkheads. "Face me, stop hiding behind your toys and fight me like a warrior." He tore through the blast doors, sprinting toward the bridge. He killed anything in his path, servitors, crewmen, bulkheads. He needed to find the heart of this deception. He needed to stop the humiliation. He burst onto the command deck covered in soot and blood. He expected to find Grant cowering under the tactical table. Instead, the bridge was empty. The consoles were dark. The crew stations were abandoned. The only thing in the room was a single Voxcaster sitting on the captain's chair, squawking with static. "I am not on the bridge," Drogath Grant's voice came from the device. "I am on the ship behind you. You boarded the wrong vessel." That's the problem with charging without reconnaissance. Drogath froze. He looked around the empty bridge. A trap within a trap. "You have no honor," the Skull Champion screamed at the radio. "You fight with tricks, you fight with lies." "I fight with leverage," Grant replied, "and you are standing in the airlock." Drogath looked down. He wasn't in an airlock. He was on the bridge. Then he heard the clamps disengage. The entire bridge module of the transport ship, a detachable emergency command pod, was being jettisoned. With a violent thud, the module separated from the main hull. Drogath was now floating in a tin can, drifting away from the battle. "Target designated," Grant's voice said, now coming from the external comms. Through the viewport, Drogath saw the transport ship he had just invaded. Its side batteries swiveled. The tanks in the hold swiveled. Every gun in the convoy turned toward the drifting bridge module. "Wait," Drogath screamed, realizing for the first time that his physical strength, his rage, and his blessings from Khorne meant nothing against the cold, hard vacuum and massed ordnance. The Weaver sees you. He will unmake your..." Grant didn't listen to the prophecy. He nodded to the gunnery officer on the True North. "Remove him from my inventory." The convoy opened fire. It wasn't a duel. It was an execution. The bridge module was hit by 100 simultaneous lance strikes and macro shells. It vaporized instantly, expanding into a brief, silent star of expanding gas and debris. On the observation deck of the True North Inquisitor, Varro lowered his magnoculars. He looked at Grant, who was already turning away to check a fuel report. Varro pulled out his journal. His quill scratched across the parchment, the sound loud in the stunned silence of the bridge. Entry 492. The subject does not seek martial glory. He treats war as a sanitation issue. He does not defeat the enemy. He liquidates them like a bad asset. It is the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. Clear the debris, Grant ordered, lighting a fresh cigar. We have a schedule to keep. Chapter 8. Shadows in Uniform. The victory against Drogath had been absolute, a triumph of mathematics over rage. But as the fleet drifted in the silent void, repairing hulls and transferring supplies, a new kind of rot began to spread. It was not the visible corruption of rust or mutation. It was a cold, creeping paranoia that moved through the ventilation shafts like a draft. Grant sat in his quarters, surrounded by a mountain of data slates. The physical war was going well. The Void Railroad was functioning. But the logistical war, the war of numbers, was showing discrepancies that made his stomach churn. 3 crates of medical supplies. Gone. Grant muttered, rubbing his eyes. Fuel consumption on Deck 7. Inconsistent with patrol schedules. Vox logs deleted. He wasn't looking at theft. Soldiers stole. That was a fact of life. He was looking at erasure. Someone aboard the Emperor's Retribution was not just stealing. They were moving undetected, altering the reality of the ship's operations. The door flew open. Commissar Elira marched in, followed by a squad of stormtroopers, their hell guns humming with lethal charge. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "We have found the leaked general," she announced, slamming a dossier onto his desk. Intercepted transmissions. Encrypted signals beamed directly to the Alpha Legion fleet. Grant picked up the dossier. It contained frequency modulations and sector scans. Who sent them? It originated from the sleeping quarters of the 4th Platoon. Cadian 9th Elira said, her hand resting on her bolt pistol. "I have ordered the entire deck sealed. We are preparing for decimation. 1 in 10 will be executed. The rest will undergo enhanced interrogation until the traitor confesses." Grant stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the metal floor. "You want to shoot 10% of my men because of a radio signal?" "It is the only way to be sure," Elira snapped. "Better that 100 innocents die than 1 heretic survives to sabotage the fleet." "Innocence proves nothing, General. It is merely a lack of evidence." "Innocence is the only thing that separates us from them." Grant said, his voice low and dangerous. He walked around the desk. "If you start shooting your own men, you do the enemy's job for them. You destroy trust. And without trust, an army is just a mob waiting to break." "The Hydra hides in the shadows," Elira argued, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "We must burn the shadows away." "No," Grant ordered. "Stand down, your execution squad. We will find the spy. But we will do it my way." "I don't need a firing squad, Elira. I need an auditor." Deep in the bowels of the ship, amidst the labyrinth of steam pipes and dripping coolant, Colonel Alias adjusted his cuff. He looked like a Cadian officer. He sounded like a Cadian officer. He had the scars, the accent, and the weariness of a veteran. Even his genetic markers would pass a standard scan. But behind his eyes, a different mind coiled. He was of the Alpha Legion, a son of the Hydra, a master of the long game. "The barbarian general is clever," Elias thought, listening to the comms chatter through a subdermal implant. "He calculates mass and velocity. But he does not understand the variable of truth." Alias had not sent the signal to give away the fleet's position. He had sent it to cause panic. He wanted Elira to execute the loyal soldiers. He wanted the Cadians to fear their commanders more than the enemy. Chaos did not always need to storm the walls. Sometimes it just needed to whisper that the walls were falling. He walked past a checkpoint, nodding to a sentry. "Carry on, soldier." "Sir," the sentry saluted completely, unaware that he had just let a wolf pass into the fold. Alias smiled. He moved toward the reactor control junction. A small sabotage there, a pressure valve loosened, a sensor recalibrated would look like an accident. but it would cripple the fleet for weeks. If you are enjoying this battle of wits between the General and the Alpha Legion, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps the channel immensely. Grant walked the corridors of Deck 7. He didn't bring stormtroopers. He brought a clipboard. He stopped at the mess hall where the men of the 4th platoon were being held under armed guard. They looked terrified not of the enemy, but of their own commissar. At ease, Grant said, stepping into the room. The tension was thick enough to choke on. He didn't ask them who the traitor was. He walked to the food dispensers. He checked the waste reclamation logs. He checked the boot polish requisitions. Elira, Grant said, pointing to a smudge on the ledger. Look at this. I see numbers, General. Irrelevant. The 4th platoon has 300 men, Grant said. But the water consumption for this sector is consistent with 301 men for the past week. And the waste output matches. He turned to the room, scanning the faces. Someone is eating here who isn't on the roster. Someone is sleeping here who doesn't belong. A ghost. Grant didn't look for guilt in their eyes. That was subjective. He looked for the physical trace of a body that occupied space. Seal the exits, he commanded. We don't need to torture anyone. We just need to do a roll call, face to face, with the biometric manifest. From the back of the room, Alias felt a flicker of genuine annoyance. He had prepared for psychic scans. He had prepared for torture. He had prepared for interrogation. He had not prepared to be caught because of a discrepancy in the water bill. As the officers began checking IDs against the central database, Alias realized his cover was dissolving. The logic of the logistician was tightening the noose. There was nowhere to hide in a closed system where every ounce of matter was accounted for. He casually reached for the last pistol on his hip. If he couldn't deceive them, he would have to kill them. Officer Grant's voice rang out his eyes, locking onto Alias across the crowd. Your boots, they are clean. The room froze. Everyone looked at Alias's boots. In a ship leaking oil and mud, they were pristine. A tiny detail, a lapse in the performance. Mud is the uniform of this army, Grant said, stepping back as the stormtroopers raised their weapons. And you are wearing a costume. Chapter 9. The Infiltrator's End. The mask did not fall off. It dissolved. The moment Grant spoke the words, the air around Colonel Alias shimmered like heat haze over asphalt. The weary face of the Cadian veteran melted away, replaced by the smooth ceramite helm of the Alpha Legion scales of indigo and green shifting in the dim light. The disguise was a psychic projection, a lie made visible now shattered by the blunt hammer of observation. Clever. The Legionnaire's voice boomed, no longer human, but a deep, vox-amplified baritone that vibrated in the chest cavities of every man in the room. The Hydra has many heads, but you look at the ground and see the shadow. He moved. It was a blur of transhuman speed that the human eye could barely track. Alias didn't draw a weapon. He simply backhanded the nearest stormtrooper. The soldier's head snapped back with a sickening crack, his helmet caving in like a crushed soda can. Open fire, Elira screamed, raising her bolt pistol. The mess hall erupted into chaos. Lost beams crisscrossed the air, burning ozone trails. But Alias was a dancer in a storm. He twisted and slid the shots, pinging harmlessly off his power armor. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to slaughter. He drew a combat knife the size of a man's forearm, at the edge crackling with a disruption field. Clear the kill zone, Grant roared, grabbing a stunned young trooper and shoving him behind a heavy steel table. Grant didn't draw a sword. He didn't have one. He pulled a frag grenade from his belt, one of the few pieces of standard kit he carried, and held it tight. He wasn't looking at the enemy. He was looking at the fire suppression system on the ceiling. Alias cut through another guard, laughing. You cling to your lists, General. You cling to your reality. But we are the architects of truth. I am Alfarius. I am the lie that kills. The lie is irrelevant, Grant muttered, pulling the pin. Physics is absolute. He didn't throw the grenade at the Space Marine. He threw it upward, wedging it into the bundle of pressurized coolant pipes running along the ceiling directly above the traitor. The explosion was small, but the result was catastrophic. The pipe burst, venting supercooled liquid nitrogen into the room with a deafening hiss. A thick, white fog instantly filled the space, dropping the temperature by 60 degrees in a second. The sudden thermal shock coated the floor in slick ice and obscured all vision. For a normal man, it was blinding. For the Alpha Legionnaire dependent on heat signatures and motion sensors, the sudden freeze created a wall of thermal noise. Alias stumbled his mag-locked boots, slipping on the flash-frozen nutrient paste that coated the floor. The thermal optics in his helm whited out. For a fraction of a second, the demigod was blind. Now, Grant's voice cut through the fog, locating the enemy, not by sight, but by the sound of his heavy armor crunching the ice. Concentrate fire on the center. Use the weight of fire. The Cadian soldiers, the very men Elira had wanted to execute for treason moments ago, did not run. They saw their general standing his ground. They saw the monster falter. A wall of last fire erupted from the perimeter. Hundreds of beams struck the center of the fog. Individually, a laser gun is a flashlight. Collectively, 300 of them concentrated on a single point is a hammer of light. Alias roared as his void shields overloaded. The sheer volume of thermal energy burned through the ceramite. He lunged forward blindly, swinging his knife, but the Cadians had fallen back to the walls, maintaining the kill box. Truth is malleable. Alias screamed, his armor smoking, glowing red hot under the barrage. We are the... Truth is a bullet, Elira shouted, stepping forward. She leveled her bolt pistol, aiming with both hands. She didn't fire wildly. She waited for the gap in the armor that the laser guns had carved open. Bang! The bolt round struck Alias in the throat seal. It detonated inside the helmet. The giant figure jerked backward, flailing before crashing to the icy floor with a sound like a falling statue. The room fell silent, save for the hissing of the broken pipe and the heavy breathing of the survivors. Grant walked through the mist, his coat frosted white. He stood over the corpse of the traitor. He didn't gloat. He looked at the dead stormtroopers, then at the living Cadians, who still held their smoking rifles. Elira walked up beside him. Her hand was shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the realization. She looked at the soldiers she had almost ordered to be decimated. They were the ones who had held the line. I would have killed them, she whispered, holstering her weapon. I would have thinned our own ranks to catch him. And he would have won, Grant said, lighting a cigar. The flame was warm in the freezing air. He wanted you to be afraid of the shadows. He wanted you to see a traitor in every uniform. He nudged the dead Space Marine with his boot. Perception doesn't hold the trench, Elira. Men do. Trust isn't a luxury. It's a structural requirement. If you break it, the whole building comes down. Grant turned to the squad leaders. Get the wounded to the medici. Double rations for everyone in this platoon tonight. And someone fix that damn pipe. He walked out of the mess hall, leaving the commissar staring at the body of the lie, finally understanding the truth of the logistician. Chapter 10. The Saint and the Butcher. The advance had halted. The relentless grinding machine of Grant's logistics had hit a wall of meat and magic in the Plaza of the Saints' Tears. It was a vast, open killing ground in the center of the hive, dominated by a cathedral that pierced the smog clouds. But the enemy was not hiding behind the walls. The Chaos Sorcerer, a twisted figure wrapped in robes of flayed skin and warped flame, stood on the cathedral steps. Below him, filling the entire square, were 50,000 civilians. They were chained together, wailing a living carpet of hostages. And mixed among them were the cultists, hidden waiting with meltaguns and suicide vests. Grant stood in the forward command post, a ruined bell tower overlooking the plaza. The rain was falling, black, oily rain that stained his coat. He looked through the magnoculars. He saw the faces of the hostages, women, children, old men. "We cannot advance," Colonel Vance reported, his voice tight. "We can't clear a field of fire without mowing down thousands of them. And if we get close, the cultists detonate. It's a stalemate." "It is not a stalemate," Inquisitor Varro said, stepping out of the shadows. "It is a sacrifice." Varro looked at the scene with cold, dispassionate eyes. He held a data slate in his hand, displaying the orbital bombardment codes. "The sorcerer is channeling a ritual. If he completes it, he will open a portal that will swallow this entire city. The lives in that square are already forfeit, General. Their souls are in peril. We must purge the site." "You want me to drop a lance strike on 50,000 people?" Grant asked, lowering the binoculars. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the terrifying logic of the Inquisitor. "I want you to save the planet," Varro pressed. "One city block for a world. It is the calculus of the Imperium. You are a man of numbers, Grant. Do the math. 50,000 dead versus 50 billion. Grant looked at the slate. The logic was sound. It was efficient. It was the fastest way to end the battle. It would save the lives of his Cadian troopers, who would otherwise die fighting in that meat grinder. Grant took the slate. The screen glowed green in the gloom. Target coordinates locked. Danger close. He thought of Cold Harbor. He thought of the wilderness. He remembered the letters he had written to mothers apologizing for their sons who died for a patch of mud. He had sent men to die before. He was a general. It was his job to spend lives to buy victory. "Just press it," Alara whispered. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the plaza, her face pale. "God Emperor, forgive us. Just press it and end it." The whiskey bottle in Grant's pocket felt heavy. The fatigue was a physical weight dragging his shoulders down. He was so tired. It would be so easy. Just one touch. A pillar of light from the heavens, and the problem is solved. The screaming stops. The war moves on. His finger hovered over the rune. He closed his eyes. He could hear the chanting of the sorcerer rising, a dissonant hum that made his teeth ache. He could hear the weeping of the crowd. "General!" The shout broke his trance. It wasn't an officer. It was a Vox transmission from the front line. It was Mariah. "General, we have visual. There's a gap. The children, they're trying to move." Grant opened his eyes and looked back through the magnoculars. Down in the square, amidst the horror, a group of older children were trying to shield the younger ones from the rain with scraps of cloth. They weren't fighting. They weren't running. They were just being human. They were comforting each other in the shadow of hell. Grant watched a young girl wipe the mud from her brother's face. The image hit him harder than a bullet. It stripped away the calculus of the Imperium. It stripped away the grim arithmetic of war. "They are not numbers," Grant whispered, his voice cracking. "They are people." He looked at the bombardment controller. If he pressed it, he wasn't a general. He was just another monster, no different from the thing on the cathedral steps. "General, the ritual is accelerating," Varro barked. "Strike now." Grant stared at the button. Then with a sudden violent motion, he hurled the data slate against the stone wall. It shattered into sparking plastic and glass. "No," Grant growled. The shaking in his hands stopped. "You are damning us all. Burrow shouted, reaching for his bolt pistol. "You are weak." "I am not weak." Grant turned on him, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying fury. "I am the commander of this army. And this army does not slaughter the people it is sworn to protect just because it is convenient." He grabbed the Voxcaster. "All units, fix bayonets. We are not doing this from the sky. We are going in. Marksmen target the cultists. Stormtroopers breach the flanks. I want that sorcerer dead, but if you kill a single civilian through negligence, I will have your stripes." He pulled his own service revolver, checking the cylinder. "The easy way is closed, gentlemen. Now we do it the hard way." Chapter 11. The Saint and the Butcher 2. The Cathedral Plaza was no longer a place of stone and mortar. It was a swirling vortex of sensory violation. The air itself seemed to bruise the skin. As Grant led the assault team through the throngs of terrified civilians, the reality of the hard way became sickeningly clear. Cadian guardsmen had to physically shove hostages aside to get clear shots. Cultists leaped from the crowd, detonating suicide vests, turning pockets of innocent people into red mist. "Push forward," Grant shouted, his voice barely audible over the screaming. He fired his revolver, the heavy recoil, a comforting physical sensation in a world going mad. He dropped a cultist who was charging with a jagged knife. "Don't stop if we stop, the ritual completes." High above on the steps, the Chaos Sorcerer laughed. It wasn't a sound from a throat. It was a psychic shockwave. He looked down at the gray-coated man struggling through the mud. "I see you, little man." And the sorcerer's voice echoed inside Grant's skull, bypassing his ears entirely. "I see the rot in your soul. You are not a hero. You are a clerk. You are a drunkard." The world shifted. The battlefield, the rain, the screaming, it all dissolved into a haze of sepia-toned smoke. Grant stumbled, dropping to one knee. He was no longer on Orestes Prime. He was back in a dusty general store in Galena. He smelled leather and stale grain. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, clutching a glass of whiskey. "Look at you," the sorcerer whispered, his voice taking the form of Grant's own father, and then his critics, then the ghosts of Cold Harbor. "Failed farmer, failed businessman. You send men to die because you don't know how to save them. You are drowning Ulysses. Why not just let go?" Grant stared at the glass in his hand. The urge to drink to numb the noise was overwhelming. The shame of his past failures, the crushing weight of the butcher label pressed down on him like a physical mountain. "You are right," Grant said to the ghosts, his voice trembling. "I am a failure. I have failed at peace. I have failed at business." He looked up, his eyes hardening. The store began to burn, the flames turning into the warp fire of the 41st millennium. "But I have never failed at war, and I am not drunk today." With a roar of pure will, Grant smashed the imaginary glass. The illusion shattered. He was back in the rain, gasping for air, nose bleeding profusely. The sorcerer stood above him, hand outstretched, stunned that a mortal mind riddled with so much self-doubt could reject the temptation of the warp. "You reject the truth," the sorcerer hissed, gathering a ball of purple lightning. "Then die in ignorance." The sorcerer prepared to unleash a bolt that would flay Grant's soul from his body. He was looking at the general. He was looking at the mind he couldn't break. He wasn't looking at the girl. Mariah, perched on the rubble of a fallen statue 200 meters away, exhaled slowly. She was crying, her tears mixing with the rain, but her hands were steady as stone. She held a long las, the scope crosshair resting directly on the sorcerer's exposed eye. "For the general," she whispered. Crack. The laser shot was perfect. It didn't just kill the sorcerer. It interrupted the flow of warp energy at the critical moment. The bolt of lightning in the sorcerer's hand backfired, consuming him in a wreath of agonizing fire. His head exploded like a ripe melon. The ritual collapsed. The purple tear in the sky snapped shut with a thunderclap that knocked every standing person to the ground. The demonic chanting ceased, instantly replaced by the heavy, mundane sound of rain hitting pavement. Grant wiped the blood from his eyes. He stood up, looking at the smoking corpse on the stairs. He didn't feel triumph. He felt hollow. "Status," he croaked. Secure Elira's voice came over the vox, sounding shaky. "The cultists are surrendering. The civilians, by the throne, General. Most of them are alive." Grant nodded. He turned to look at his flank. "Vance, get the men moving to secure the perimeter." There was no answer. Grant walked over to where the flank command squad had been. Captain Vance lay face down in a puddle of iridescent sludge. He had taken a bolt round to the chest, a shot he would have avoided if they had just leveled the square from orbit. He had died holding the line so the civilians wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. Grant knelt beside the dead captain. He closed Vance's eyes. This was the price. The calculus of the Imperium would have saved Vance and killed the 50,000. Grant's arithmetic had saved the 50,000, but killed a good man. "Write his name down," Grant said to his aide, his voice devoid of emotion. "Make sure his family knows he didn't die for ground. He died for people." He stood up, the weight of the command heavier than ever. He had won the moral victory, but the universe didn't hand out medals for morality. It handed out scars. High above, Inquisitor Varro watched the scene from the Emperor's retribution. He slowly holstered his bolt pistol. He wrote in his journal, "He saved the city. But the galaxy punishes good men." I wonder how long he can carry that weight before his back breaks. "Prepare the drop ships," Grant ordered, lighting a cigar that refused to stay lit in the downpour. "We aren't done. The Iron Warriors are knocking at the gate." Chapter 12. Gambit at the Broken Gate Eye. The moon of Orestes Minor was not a natural satellite. It was a weapon platform the size of a continent. Known as the Broken Gate, it controlled the orbital lanes for the entire system. And sitting upon its throne was Warsmith Garrix of the Iron Warriors. He was a creature of cold iron and bitterness, a veteran of the Long War who looked upon walls not as obstacles, but as mathematical equations to be solved. "Here comes Garrix," rumbled his voice, grinding like tectonic plates. He stood on the parapet of the obsidian bastion, watching the Imperial dropships descend through the thin atmosphere. The logistician, the one who thinks he can audit the IV Legion. Garrix checked the auspex. The Imperial deployment was amateurish. Standard formations, infantry waves supported by basilisk artillery. They were setting up directly in front of the bastion's primary kill zone. It was the Field of Fire 101. To attack there was suicide. "He insults me," Garrix spat, revving his power claw. "Does he think I am a frothing berserker like Vorin? Does he think I am a fool like Drogath? I wrote the book on siegecraft while his ancestors were banging rocks together." "Shall we deploy the Terminators, Warsmith?" a subordinate asked. No, Garrix sneered. "Let the automated turrets chew them up. Let him break his teeth on the iron. We will watch him bleed until he begs for the mercy of death." Down in the gray dust of the moon's surface, the reality was a nightmare. The Broken Gate was impregnable. Its walls were 30 meters of void-hardened ferrocrete, shielded by layers of overlapping void shields. The Imperial Guard wasn't attacking a wall. They were attacking a mountain. "Forward for the Emperor," a Cadian sergeant screamed, blowing his whistle. 3,000 men rose from the shallow craters and charged. The response was instant. The fortress erupted. Heavy bolters, autocannons, and missile launchers turned the vacuum into a grid of exploding death. Men didn't just fall, they evaporated. The noise was a continuous, bone-shaking roar that vibrated through the soles of Grant's boots in the command trench. Grant stood with his back to the wall, looking at his pocket watch. He didn't look over the parapet. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what was happening. He could feel the deaths in the tremors of the ground. General Elira shouted over the roar of artillery. She grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Call them back. This is madness. We are throwing them into a wood chipper. You said you don't waste lives." Grant pulled his arm away. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were haunted. "I am not wasting them," he said, his voice flat. "I am spending them." Spending them. Elira recoiled, as if he had slapped her. "For what? We aren't scratching the paint. Look at the augers. The shields are holding at 98%. We are dying for nothing." Grant checked his watch again. 3 minutes, he muttered. "I need 3 more minutes of noise." He turned to the master of ordnance. "Fire everything Grant ordered, every gun, every battery. I don't care if you melt the barrels. I want the ground to shake so hard that their teeth rattle." "Sir, we are running low on shells," the officer protested. "Fire," Grant roared, a flash of anger breaking through his calm facade. "I want that warsmith to look at nothing but the explosions. I want him deaf. I want him blind with arrogance." The Imperial artillery unleashed a bombardment that cracked the moon's crust. The sky turned white with fire. To the Iron Warriors, it looked like desperation, a frantic, flailing attempt to brute force a solution. But deep underground, beneath the noise, beneath the blood-soaked surface, something else was happening. 500 meters below the obsidian bastion, in the dark silence of the bedrock, Magos Tiber was working. He was not using explosives. He was using thermal drills, silent, high-frequency mining lasers that melted rock into glass without a tremor. Grant's frontal assault was not an attack. It was a distraction. It was the loudest diversion in history. Seismic dampers active Tiber clicked his mechadendrites, weaving a complex pattern over the detonator. Surface vibration from artillery impact is successfully masking our excavation signature. The Iron Warriors detect only the bombardment. He stood in a tunnel that ran directly under the foundation of the fortress's main void shield generator. Packed around him were not soldiers, but tons of concentrated melta-charges and seismic warheads. "The logistician understands the geometry of the weak point," Tiber noted, admiring the placement. The Iron Warriors built their walls to withstand impacts from the front. They did not build their floor to withstand a sun igniting beneath it. Back on the surface, the slaughter continued. The Cadian 812th was being decimated. A retreat was sounded, a ragged, bloody affair that left thousands of bodies in the dust. Up on the wall, Warsmith Garrix laughed. It was a cold, metallic sound. "He breaks," Garrix said, watching the Imperials flee. "He has spent his strength. Prepare the counterattack. We will crush the survivors." In the trench, Grant closed his pocket watch with a snap. The screaming had stopped. The artillery ceased. The sudden silence was louder than the guns. "Is it done?" Elira asked, tears of rage in her eyes. "Did you get your 3 minutes?" Grant looked at her. "I didn't send them to breach the wall, Elira. I sent them to keep the warsmith looking forward." He picked up a small remote detonator. It was wired not to a missile, but to a deep-frequency transmitter. "In my world," Grant said, lighting a cigar with a hand that trembled slightly, "we learned that if you can't go over the mountain, you go under it." He pressed the button. Chapter 13. When the wall fell, the explosion did not begin with fire. It began with a sickening lurch, a sudden vertigo that gripped every living soul on the moon of Orestes Minor. The ground didn't shake. It liquefied. Beneath the obsidian bastion, the thermal charges detonated in a precise geometric sequence. They didn't push force outward. They vaporized the bedrock supporting the massive fortress. The millions of tons of ferrocrete adamantium and iron warriors were suddenly resting on nothing but superheated gas and gravity. Anomaly detected, the Auspex officer on Garrix's bridge screamed, but it was too late. The bastion didn't fall over. It fell through, with a sound like the spine of a planet snapping. The entire southern quadrant of the fortress, including the void shield generators and the primary ammunition magazine, collapsed into the man-made abyss. The ground simply opened its maw and swallowed the pride of the IV Legion. Grant watched from the trench. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He shielded his eyes as a geyser of dust and pulverized rock shot 10 kilometers into the thin atmosphere. The shockwave hit them seconds later, a wall of displaced air that flattened the Cadian flags and forced the soldiers to huddle in the dirt. But through the dust, they saw the impossible. The invincible wall was gone. In its place was a jagged, smoking crater, tangled with rebar and the crushed remains of towers. "The shields are down," Grant said, lowering his arm. "The generators are at the bottom of that pit." He turned to the Voxmaster. "Signal the fleet. Bombardment pattern Alpha. Target the crater. Don't let them dig themselves out." It was brutal. It was unfair. It was exactly how Grant intended to win. He hadn't tried to fight the Iron Warriors man to man. He had simply removed the floor they were standing on. Deep in the wreckage of the command tower, Warsmith Garrix was pinned beneath a slab of plasteel the size of a titan. His Terminator armor was cracked, his internal organs ruptured. The darkness was total, save for the sparking of severed cables. Damage report: Garrix coughed, spitting black oil and blood. Squads respond. Static. Nothing but static and the groans of dying metal. "I am iron." Garrix wheezed, trying to lift the slab. Servos whined and failed. He was trapped. The master of sieges had been buried by a mining trick. Malachar Garrix called out into the void, his voice laced with panic. "I require assistance. Open the way. I still live. I can still fight." The shadows in the corner of the crushed room coalesced. A pair of glowing purple eyes opened in the darkness. But there was no salvation in them, only amusement. Iron within iron, without the voice of Malachar, the weaver slithered through the wreckage. "But iron rusts, Garrix, and you have been broken. Get me out." Garrix roared. "I will rebuild. I will slaughter them." "You were a tool," Malachar whispered. "A hammer to break their resolve. But the logistician did not strike your shield. He struck your foundation. You are no longer useful. You are just debris." The purple eyes faded. The warp did not come to save him. Instead, the shadows seemed to tighten, pulling the rubble closer, suffocating him. Above, the muted thump of Imperial artillery began. The shells weren't hitting a fortress. They were pounding a grave. Garrix realized with a final crushing horror that he would not die in glorious combat. He would die in the dark, crushed by the weight of his own failure. Grant walked through the dust storm 2 hours later. The crater was a hellscape of twisted metal and fire, but the battle was effectively over. The Iron Warriors who hadn't been crushed were being mopped up by the Cadians, their morale shattered by the sudden destruction of their stronghold. Elira walked beside him. She looked at the devastation, then at the man who had ordered it. "You sacrificed 3,000 men to bait the trap," she said quietly. "Was it worth it?" Grant stopped. He kicked a piece of shrapnel, a fragment of an Iron Warrior's shoulder pad. "If we had assaulted the walls, we would have lost 30,000, he said. "It's arithmetic, Elira. Cruel, bloody arithmetic." He took a deep breath. The air tasted of copper and victory, but it didn't taste sweet. It tasted like ash. "We have the moon," Grant said, turning back to the dropship. "We have the orbital lanes. The road to the final battle is open." He looked up at the sky where the great rift pulsed like an infection. "He's watching," Grant murmured. "Malashar. He knows I'm coming, and he knows I don't play by his rules." Grant didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who had just finished a double shift at a slaughterhouse. "Let's go. I need a drink, and I need to write 3,000 letters to next of kin." Chapter 14. Echoes of Cadia. The mopping up operations on Orestes Minor revealed a tragedy deeper than the crater of the broken gate. In a sealed subterranean supply depot cut off from the main fortress, the Cadian 812th found the lost 45th. They were not Iron Warriors. They were not demons. They were Cadians. Men and women who had worn the same uniforms, sung the same hymns, and held the line at the Cadian gate. But now their armor was scored with the 8-pointed star scratched hastily into the ceramite with knife points. They were starving, huddled in the dark, their eyes hollowed out by despair and the whispering madness of the warp. When Grant entered the depot, he didn't find an enemy fighting to the death. He found a regiment that had simply broken under the weight of abandonment. "Traitors, Mariah," spat her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. She gripped her lace gun so tight her knuckles were white. "They are worse than the demons. They betrayed the memory of the fallen." The traitor commander, a man whose face was a map of scars and grime, looked up. He didn't reach for his weapon. He just looked tired. "We called for aid," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves. "For 3 months. The Munitorum forgot us. The Navy forgot us. Only he answered. The Weaver promised us bread. He promised us an end to the pain." "Silence, heretic." Commissar Elira stepped forward, her bolt pistol raised. "You do not get to speak. You forfeited your right to breathe when you turned your back on the Golden Throne." She turned to the loyalist troops behind her. "Drag them out. Burn them. Leave their bodies to rot. Let them be a warning to any who falter." The loyalist Cadians surged forward, their anger palpable. This was personal. This was a stain on their honor. They wanted blood. They wanted to tear these traitors apart with their bare hands to prove their own loyalty. "Stand down," Grant said. The order was quiet, but it sucked the air out of the room. Elira froze. "General, they are traitors. The punishment is mandatory." Grant walked forward, pushing past the commissar. He stood before the traitor commander. He looked at the defaced aquila on the man's chest. He didn't see a monster. He saw a soldier who had been pushed past the breaking point. He remembered the Confederate soldiers at Appomattox, starving, barefoot, defeated. "You broke," Grant said simply. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of structural failure. "We wanted to live," the traitor whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. "I know," Grant said. He looked around at the huddled survivors. War is a heavy burden. Not everyone can carry it. Grant turned to face his own troops. "There will be no torture. There will be no desecration." Sir Mariah protested, stepping forward. They deserve a soldier's death." Grant's voice rose sharp and commanding. They were Cadians. They held the line for 10 years before they broke. "We do not spit on the dead, Mariah. We do not become animals because they failed to remain men." He looked at the traitor commander. "I cannot let you live. You know this. The infection runs too deep." The commander nodded slowly. He straightened his back, a ghost of his former discipline returning. "I know. But I will not let you die as animals," Grant said. "Form a firing squad. Standard spacing. 1 volley, clean." The execution was held in the courtyard of the depot. It was not a spectacle. There was no screaming, no preaching. The traitor regiment stood against the wall. They didn't beg. In their final moments, treated with the dignity of soldiers, rather than the cruelty of heretics, they seemed to remember who they once were. "Ready," Grant ordered. The loyalist Cadians raised their rifles. Their anger had evaporated, replaced by a somber, heavy silence. They weren't killing monsters. They were putting down brothers who had lost their way. The traitor commander looked at Grant. He nodded once, a final gesture of gratitude. Fire. The volley cracked. The bodies fell. It was over. "Bury them," Grant said, turning away. "Mark the graves with their regiment number. No names, just the number." Elira walked beside him, holstering her pistol. She looked shaken. "You showed them mercy, General. The Inquisition would call that dangerous." "Cruelty breeds fanatics," Elira Grant said, lighting a cigar. "Dignity breeds loyalty. Look at your men." Elira looked. The Cadians were burying the dead. There was no fear in their eyes anymore. The paranoia that Alias had tried to sow, the hatred that the Civil War generated, it was gone. In its place was a solemn, unbreakable resolve. They trusted Grant, not just to lead them to victory, but to keep their souls intact. Grant walked to the edge of the landing platform, looking up at the sky. He felt heavy. The butcher's bill had just added another 1,000 names, and this time they were names that should have been on his side. "It is done," Grant murmured. As if in answer, the universe screamed. The sky above Orestes Minor didn't just crack, it shattered. The reality of the materium was peeled back like rotten fruit. A storm of purple and black lightning engulfed the stars. From the tear, a fleet emerged, ships so vast and twisted, they defied sanity. They were not raiding vessels. They were world killers. And at the center of the formation was a vessel that looked like a cathedral made of bone and shadows. "General," the Vox officer whispered, terror choking his voice. "High band transmission. It's for you." A holographic projection flickered into life on the platform. A figure floated there, wrapped in robes that seemed to be woven from the fabric of space itself. Malachar, the Weaver. "You fix the broken things," Malakar's voice purred, sounding like the rustling of a million spiders. "You bury the dead. You organize the chaos. But tell me, logistician, how do you inventory a storm?" Chapter 15. The Black Storm. The sky above Orestes Minor did not just darken. It died. The arrival of Malakar's fleet was not an invasion, it was an atmospheric event. The sheer mass of the Chaos battleships, twisted cathedrals of bone and iron, displaced the very air of the moon, creating hurricane-force winds that howled with the voices of the damned. Drop pods rained down like black hail, thousands of them streaking through the atmosphere in trails of fire. Grant stood on the landing platform, his coat whipping violently around him. He held his hat in place with one hand, his other gripping the railing. To any other commander, this was the apocalypse. To Grant, it was a heavy concentration of enemy force. Auspex confirms 12 Desolator-class battleships, Inquisitor Varro shouted over the wind, his face pale. And a planet killer. "General, we have lost orbital superiority. We have lost the initiative. High Command has sent the signal, Code Vermilion. We are to evacuate immediately and initiate exterminatus from deep range. We burn the sector and leave." Grant turned to look at the Inquisitor. "Burn it. After we spent 3 weeks fixing the supply lines, after we buried the dead. It is the only way to deny the enemy," Varro pleaded. "We cannot hold this rock against a Black Crusade." Grant looked back at the sky. He saw the drop pods slamming into the surface, vomiting forth hordes of demons and traitor marines. He saw the explosions blossoming across the horizon. "I propose to fight it out on this line." Grant said, his voice low, but cutting through the gale. "If we run now, we lose the factories on Orestes Prime. We lose the moon. We lose the sector. And the enemy gets stronger. No, we do not run." "This is suicide," Varro screamed. It is a siege, Grant corrected. He has brought his entire inventory to the table. That means he has nothing left in reserve. Grant turned to the Voxmaster. Get me Magos Tiber. Tell him to activate the dormant grid. In the command center of the Mechanicus excavation unit, Magos Tiber received 2 signals simultaneously. One was from Grant. The other was a high-priority binary burst from the Archmagos on Mars. Command abort. Assets compromised. Preserve God machines. Withdraw to jump point. Tiber's optical sensors whirred. He looked at the logic engine. Mars demanded retreat to save the machines. But Grant offered an efficiency probability of 12% for total victory. It was statistically insignificant. It was madness. But in the last month, Tiber had seen Grant turn madness into mathematics. Magos, his acolyte, queried. The withdrawal protocols are ready. Tiber looked at the message from Mars. Then he looked at his mechadendrite. With a deliberate, forceful motion, he drove a spike directly into the receiver unit of the long-range Vox. Sparks flew. The message died. Regrettable, Tiber droned. Atmospheric interference has severed our link to Mars. We are unable to receive the retreat order. Therefore, the previous directive remains in effect. Support the logistician. He turned to the console. Activate the gravity anchors. We stand. On the surface, the Black Legion charged. They expected the Imperials to be boarding their ships, fleeing in terror. Instead, they found the trenches fully manned. They found the artillery waiting. They do not run, Malachar mused from his throne on the Weaver of Agony. How quaint. They wish to die on their feet. Let us oblige them, a demon prince growled. Wait, Malachar narrowed his eyes. He felt a disturbance in the warp. Not a psychic presence, but a physical shifting. Down on the moon, Grant checked his watch. Now. He didn't fire a gun. He signaled the fleet. The Void Railroad. Then the line of supply ships that Grant had so meticulously arranged did not scatter. Instead, the empty cargo haulers' massive, thick-hulled beasts engaged their engines. They weren't trying to escape. They were ramming speed. They weren't aiming for the Chaos ships. They were aiming for the space between them. Detonate cargo bays 1 through 50, Grant ordered. The supply ships were not empty. For weeks, under the guise of logistics, Grant had been packing the returning ships with the highly unstable promethium waste and cracked plasma cores from the factories of Orestes Prime. He had turned his supply line into a moving minefield. In orbit, the empty haulers exploded. It wasn't a nuclear flash. It was a dirty, expanding cloud of burning plasma and radioactive debris that created a localized nebula of blinding interference. The Chaos fleet, tightly packed for the invasion, was suddenly blind. Their sensors were white out. Their void shields sparked and overloaded as they were bathed in the intense radiation storm. They are blind, Captain Vance's successor shouted. Their targeting arrays are down. Grand strategy, Grant muttered, lighting a match. You can't hit what you can't see. And right now they are swimming in soup. He picked up the Voxcaster. All batteries. You have the pre-calculated coordinates. The enemy is trapped in the gravity well. Rain. The ground shook as thousands of Earthshaker cannons fired into the sky. They didn't need to aim. The sky was full of targets that couldn't move. Chapter 16. The Man in the Mud. The mud was not just earth and water anymore. It was a slurry of promethium ash and the liquefied remains of the brave. The battle for the broken gate had devolved into a primal struggle. The sky was a bruising purple lit only by the streaking fire of drop pods and the relentless flashes of Earthshaker rounds. On the left flank, the line was buckling. A regiment of Planetary Defense Force PDF troopers conscripts who had never held a lasgun before this week threw down their weapons. The terror of the Black Legion was too much. They turned to run eyes wide with the madness of the warp. Commissar Elira blocked their path. In the past, she would have shot the first man to turn. She would have executed them for cowardice. But as she raised her bolt pistol, she saw the fear not of death, but of meaninglessness. She lowered the gun. "Where will you run?" Elira screamed over the din of battle. "There is no ship to take you. There is no safe harbor. The only thing behind you is a cold grave." She grabbed a fleeing boy by his collar, hauling him back. "The general did not leave us. He is up there in the fire, fighting for you. Do not leave him. Turn around. Fight for the man next to you, because he is all you have." The boy looked at her, then at his terrified comrades. Elira didn't offer the Emperor's judgment. She offered brotherhood. Slowly shaking, the boy picked up his rifle. The line held. In the command bunker, the world ended. A sorcerous bolt from Malakar's flagship struck the command datum. The roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and concrete. The Voxmaster was vaporized instantly. Grant was thrown across the room, slamming into the tactical map table. General Mariah screamed, crawling through the smoke. The radio was dead. The uplink to the fleet was severed. For all intents and purposes, the army was headless. Panic began to ripple through the staff officers. "We are cut off. We need to retreat." Mariah looked at the unconscious general, then at the screaming officers. She wiped the blood from her face. She picked up the backup Vox handset. "Silence," she barked, her voice cracking with a command authority she didn't know she possessed. "The general's orders stand. We do not retreat. We calculate." She looked at the map. She knew Grant's mind. She knew the geometry. Battery A and B suppress Sector 7. Infantry hold the ridge. Do not give them an inch. She was no longer just a scribe. She was the general's echo. Grant woke up to the smell of ozone and burning paper. He was alone in the ruined corner of the bunker. The rest of the room was blocked by fallen debris. He tried to stand, but his leg gave way. Broken. He coughed, spitting up blood. He fumbled for his cigar case. Flattened. "You persist," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the room. It came from the shadows that were stretching, lengthening, forming a silhouette of jagged robes and spider-like limbs. Malakar the Weaver stood before him. Not a hologram this time, but a psychic projection so potent it possessed physical mass. The Chaos Lord loomed over the broken general. "I have unmade worlds," Malakar hissed, stepping closer. "I have woven the fates of stars. And you are just a man in the mud. A creature of dirt and arithmetic." Grant dragged himself up, leaning against the shattered concrete. He felt for his service revolver. It was empty. "You think your little equations can stop the warp?" Malakar laughed, and the sound was like glass grinding in Grant's ears. "You are dust, Ulysses." Grant looked at the demon. His vision was blurring red at the edges. He reached for the only thing left working on his belt, the short-range artillery designator. "Dust," Grant rasped, his voice a wet growl. "Dust is a problem, Malakar." He keyed the frequency. It was a direct line to the heavy basilisk battery Mariah was commanding. "Dust jams guns. What are you doing?" Malakar stepped forward, sensing the spike in Vox traffic. "You cannot call for help. I have isolated you." "I'm not calling for help," Grant said, looking the demon in its burning eyes. "I'm calling for rain." He punched in the coordinates. 000. Danger close. Target my position. "Fire," Grant whispered. The response was instantaneous. Mariah, receiving the coordinates, hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was the general's location. But she knew the logic. She knew the sacrifice. With a sob, she authorized the volley. The sky tore open. 12 Earthshaker shells, each the size of a man, screamed down from the heavens. Malachar looked up, his arrogance shattering into disbelief. "You would kill yourself to banish me." "I'm already dead," Grant smiled, blood staining his teeth. "I'm just closing the inventory." The shells impacted. The bunker didn't just explode, it was erased. The concussion was so violent, it disrupted the local reality. Malachar's physical projection was shredded, his connection to the materium severed by the overwhelming kinetic fury. The demon screamed as his essence was blown apart, scattered back to the warp in a million fragments. The laughter died. The shadows vanished. There was only the thunder of the guns, then the silence of the grave. Chapter 17. The Unwilling Lord Militant. The smoke over the command bunker did not clear for 3 days. When it finally lifted, revealed by the harsh winds of Orestes Minor, there was nothing left but a crater of glass and twisted rebar. The Cadian 812th stood at the rim, silent hats in hands. They had won. The Black Legion had broken orbit, their leadership shattered, their morale crushed by the inexplicable suicide of their dark prophet. But the victory felt like a funeral. "He is gone." Mariah whispered, her face streaked with soot. She held the general's battered lighter found in the mud. He called the fire on himself. Then a sound, faint, rhythmic, tap, tap, tap. It was coming from beneath the largest slab of concrete in the center of the pit. It wasn't the sound of a rescue beacon. It was the sound of a rock hitting metal. A steady, annoyed beat. Medic Elira screamed, sliding down the side of the crater, disregarding all protocol. "Dig, everyone, dig!" They pulled him out 20 minutes later. Ulysses S. Grant was a ruin of a man. His coat was shredded, his arm was shattered, and half his face was covered in dried blood. But he was breathing. The heavy oak table of the tactical map had collapsed over him, creating a pocket of air, a triangular sanctuary amidst the destruction. He blinked against the harsh light of the med servitors. He looked at the weeping soldiers, at the sky, then at the lighter in Mariah's hand. "I asked for a light," Grant rasped, his voice sounding like gravel in a mixer, not a funeral. The recovery bay on the Emperor's Retribution smelled of antiseptic and incense. Grant sat on the edge of the biobed, refusing to lie down. His arm was encased in a mechanical brace, and his ribs were wrapped tight. Inquisitor Varro stood by the door. He was not alone. A holographic projection of a High Admiral from Sector Command shimmered in the air, his face purple with rage. "He destroyed 5 megahaulers," the Admiral shouted. "He wasted millions of tons of promethium. He sacrificed a moon fortress. This man is not a hero. He is a liability. I want him court-martialed for gross negligence of Imperial assets." Grant didn't look up. He was busy trying to clean the dirt from under his fingernails. "I won," he said simply. "You won by destroying the infrastructure," the Admiral sputtered. "I won by spending the currency I had," Grant replied, looking at the hologram with tired eyes. "Ships can be built. Fortresses can be raised. Dead men don't come back, Admiral. I spent the things that don't bleed to save the things that do." The Admiral opened his mouth to retort, but Varro stepped forward. With a casual flick of his wrist, he terminated the transmission. The hologram vanished. "Bureaucrats," Varro muttered. "They prefer a glorious defeat to a messy victory." So Grant said, finally managing to light a fresh cigar, "Am I to be executed?" "On the contrary," Varro said, pulling a scroll from his coat. It was sealed with heavy wax and gold ribbon. "The High Lords of Terra do not look at the inventory sheets, General. They look at the map, and the map says you held the Cadian Gate when Astartes failed." Varro handed the scroll to Grant. "They are promoting you." Grant unrolled the parchment. The text was dense, filled with high Gothic legalese. But the title at the bottom was clear: Lord Militant of the Orestes Crusade. Grant stared at the words. He felt a cold pit in his stomach. It wasn't a reward. It was a sentence. I don't want it, Grant said, dropping the scroll on the bed. I want to go home. Or at least, I want to retire to a quiet front where nothing happens. There is no quiet front. Varro said, his voice grim. And you cannot go home. You are a symbol now, Ulysses. The men believe in you. The machine spirit tolerates you. Even the warp fears you. The Imperium does not discard such tools. Varro leaned in. You can refuse. But if you do, the 812th will be broken up and sent to penal legions for following a rogue commander. Take the title, and they live. Grant looked at the cigar smoke curling in the air. He thought of Mariah. He thought of the dead Captain Vance. He thought of the thousands of letters he still had to write. It's a trap, Grant muttered. It is duty, Varro corrected. The ceremony was brief. There were no parades. Grant refused them. He stood on the observation deck wearing a new coat that felt too stiff, the insignia of a Lord Militant pinned to his chest. Below him, the fleet was gathering. New ships were arriving, huge battleships, sleek cruisers. They were painting a new symbol on their hulls, a simple white U inside a cog. Mariah stood beside him now, his aide-de-camp. The fleet awaits your orders, Lord Militant. The systems in the subsector are reporting riots. Orcs are massing on the fringe. The Tyranids are drifting near the rim. Grant sighed. The list was endless. The inventory of threats never reached zero. Glory is for the poets, Grant whispered to the stars. I am just here to manage the butcher's bill. He turned away from the window, his face set in stone. The tired man from Galena was gone. In his place was the Lord of Logistics, the man who had stared into the abyss and organized it. Get me the manifests, Grant ordered, walking toward the bridge. And tell the quartermaster to order more whiskey. We have a long war ahead of us. The galaxy is a meat grinder. It chews up gods, heroes, and monsters alike. But occasionally, just occasionally, the meat breaks the machine. Ulysses S. Grant did not come to the 41st millennium to save it. He came to fix it. And as long as he has a cigar and a supply manifest, the enemies of mankind will learn to fear the math. This concludes the first campaign of the Logistician. If you enjoyed this journey into the grim darkness, please like and subscribe. What challenge should Grant face next? The biological horror of the Tyranids, or the bureaucratic nightmare of Terra itself? Comment below with your ideas. Thank you for watching, and remember, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics.